Freeze the frame right, at the first breath. A duchess's raw memory, a father's guarded olive branch, and the crown's hardest boundary, all walked into the same week, and for once the balcony stayed empty while the truth did the talking. If you're new here, settle in. If you're one of our regulars, you know the drill, no froth, no guessing games, just the heartbeat behind the headlines. It began with a voice that has lived both sides of the velvet rope. Sarah Ferguson didn't reach for a slogan, she reached for what cannot be faked. She was in New York on that morning that remade the calendar into a wound. She remembers the ash on the sidewalks that tasted like metal, the sirens that didn't stop, the strangers who pulled strangers into doorways, because there was nowhere else to take them but together. She chose small words, precious lives, never forget, and they landed with the weight of lived fact. No costume, no pose, only witness. The older you are, the more you hear the cadence of truth, when it walks into a room and refuses to sell itself. That note traveled further than social media. Down a corridor at Clarence's house, a door was opened for a meeting that had to be small to be real, father and son, no photographers parked like furniture, no handler with a stopwatch, tea cooling between sentences that were harder to lift than any sword. If you have ever stood outside a room like that, you know the courage is in the knock, not the speech. It did not untangle everything a book and a broadcast knotted. It did not file off the corners of two very different lives. It did something better. It reminded both men, and the country that pays attention, that beginnings worth anything arrive quietly and look unimpressive while they are working. Hold that image beside another the crown refuses to blur. The line over Prince Andrew is not a weather report. It is not time to the news cycle, not softened by the need for another pair of hands on the rotor, not improving with age like port. It is a line. No return to public duties. No soft launch through minor ribbon cuttings. No testing the country's patience to prove a point about forgiveness. The monarchy can be warm in private and cold in public on purpose. That is what it looks like when an institution remembers it is not a rescue service for reputations, but a trust held in common by people who have to see themselves in it to keep it. The bargain is unadorned. If you ask the nation for respect, you keep your standards where the nation can see them. Cross that once, and you don't have a standard anymore, you have a wish. Ferguson's voice matters here, because she has been both welcomed and shut out, both smiled at and scolded. She knows what it costs to learn a lesson with cameras on. On this week of remembrance, she did something rarer than nostalgia. She measured the present against the best of the past. Out of terror came labor, out of smoke came human hands held steady by duty that had no audience. There is not a public job in Britain that cannot be judged by that test. Are you running toward the hurt, or toward the light? Are you making yourself useful, or interesting? Are you protecting what is tender, or protecting your own comfort? It is an adult yardstick, and it is the only one that holds in weather. Seen through that lens, the king's two moves, one soft, one steel, make one sentence. The soft one says, I am a father and the room is open. The steel one says, I am the sovereign and the threshold is closed. Compassion at the table, clarity at the door. The late Queen ran that grammar so long the country forgot how hard it is. You do not learn it from a handbook. You learn it from days when your heart and your duty would pick different routes, and you force them to walk the same one without breaking anything you cannot repair. For those of you who grew up with the late Queen as the nation's fixed star, you can see the inheritance being sorted carefully rather than theatrically. Charles cannot be her. He is himself, a convener, a nudger, a man who carried causes before causes were fashionable, and who has now taught himself the sovereign's trick of stepping sideways so the office stays larger than the occupant. But on the existential questions, who stands where, who returns when, who does not, he is choosing spine over sentiment. Mercy is private and can go on for years. Amnesia is public and contagious and takes others down with it. That difference is not cleverness. It's survival. Harry's road is his, and he is walking it with a stubbornness that will not please everyone. He has built work that is not made of press releases, and has built a life that does not run on palace electricity. None of that erases the ache that bangs on the pipes when you stand in a room with your father after 19 months of headlines. None of it rewrites a chapter written in ink you regret and ink you defend. It does, however, make a first step both possible and necessary. Marathons start with feet that feel foolish. To the adults watching, you are allowed to hold two thoughts at once: his work matters, and the family matters, and neither fixes the other in a week. Andrew's road is as simple as it is severe. Some doors do not reopen. Public trust is not a staircase you climb again if you wait politely on the landing. The king has chosen the harder way, because the easy way snaps the beam the second you lean on it. If you have ever said, in any context, that standards must still mean something, then you recognize the quiet in Andrew's diary for what it is: not cruelty, not theater, maintenance. The ordinary work of keeping shape in a century that melts things. And yes, the Prince and Princess of Wales carried the visible rhythm while everyone else was learning their lines again. They did it the late Queen's way: small rooms, patient smiles, hands washed in church hall sinks, jokes that do not reach for applause but for ease. Watch them closely when storms build and you will see the method that will keep the next rain calm: arrive on time, lower the temperature, leave the place steadier than you found it. People over 50 recognize this at once because they've lived it. Stop explaining and do the job. There is a terrible temptation to label everything strategy, because strategy flatters our cleverness. Often the truth is duller and truer. Sometimes a father opens a door because a father should. Sometimes a line stays shut because it must. Sometimes a woman who has lived in and out of favor talks about the day the sky fell and chooses to honor the hands that held it up. None of those things is a move. All of them are a choice. And choices are what make character visible when the lighting is unhelpful. If you want to know what this means for the crown as an institution rather than as a family, listen for proportion. The late Queen understood it to the bone: speak rarely, act steadily, let time make the case. Charles is finding his version. He will speak more, he will host, coax, and put his shoulder into causes that predate his reign and will outlast it. But on the questions that tangle the crown with the country's trust, he is choosing the narrow path that leads somewhere rather than the wide path that feels nicer to walk for a day. It's not romantic. It is adult. Sarah Ferguson's remembrance threaded that same needle. She named the grief without making it a performance. She insisted on the kindness that followed without making it a fairy tale. She refused to end the sentence at heartbreak. That is not naive, it is disciplined. The monarchy will make sense to the people who keep it if it practices the same discipline. Acknowledge what has broken. Repair what you can. Do not reward what cannot be defended, because it is inconvenient to hold the line. Keep your voice low. Keep your pace even. Trust that consistency will do what spin cannot. None of this will gratify those who live for climax. There won't be a moment when brothers clasp hands on the palace steps and the orchestra plays a cue only we can hear. There won't be a surprise diary note sliding Andrew onto a dais, because a week was quiet and someone thought the public had forgotten. What there will be, if the method holds, is something older and more useful: standards held without fuss, compassion offered without announcements, service done at human height, until the noise runs out of breath. So we end where we began, but straighter. A duchess remembered the worst morning and refused to let it erase the best in us. A father opened a door and made space for a first sentence. A sovereign kept a boundary and proved it was a boundary, not a mood. If you were waiting to see whether second chances and standards can live in the same house, you just Saw the house rules being written in a hand even cynics can read. If this rang true to your own memories and your own measure of public life, tell us below, where were you? What do you make of the Clarence House Hour? And where do you draw the line between mercy and amnesia? And if you value this kind of calm, grown-up read of a noisy week, tap like, subscribe, and we'll keep walking the narrow path with you, steadily, without shortcuts, one honest step at a time.